Speaking on behalf of the board, I want to say thank you to all of you coming out today. I'm sure that there's other things you could be doing and you're interrupting that to be here. And so I'm very grateful to you for being here. It's always helpful for us to hear from the public and what's on your mind and in your hearts. And so please know that your concerns are things that we take very seriously. So thank you once again, one and all, for being here today. If we could move forward with the mission moment, I'll turn things over then to, as if we haven't been having a mission moment. So, but I'll turn things over to Shiloh to lead us through
And
that.
I'm going to hand it right off to Brittany because she has the closest connection to our mission moment of the day.
All right, well, good afternoon. The provider who has so graciously accepted at short notice this invitation to share her step-to-quality journey with us today is the owners of Daddy's Daycare Child Development Center. Daddy's Daycare has been dedicated to serving children and their families in the Cincinnati area for almost a decade. Daddy's is dedicated to striving to strengthen the foundation of these children's educational experience. So please help me to welcome, to congratulate, as well as thank Miss Melina Campbell.
Good afternoon. My husband and I own Daddy's Daycare Child Development Center in the West End, and I am the administrator. I am honored to be here to share with you our success in achieving our 5-star quality award with the help of Cincinnati Preschool Promise. When the news of the levy started flying around, I have to tell you I wasn't happy. I was actually quite nervous. At that time, prior to that time, we had 26 children in our preschool classrooms, and we all know, if you're familiar with budgets in child care centers, that our preschool programs really help balance our budget. When the neighborhood elementary schools started offering preschool, we went from 26 children to 6. It was very traumatic. The levy passes, and I'm still not interested about hearing anything about Cincinnati Preschool Promise. We had moved into a new facility, our enrollments had increased, and the last thing I wanted to deal with was losing my preschoolers all over again. Someone shared with me, where if you're at least a 3-star center, there's possibilities of partnering with the Cincinnati Preschool Promise. We hadn't even had 1 star. So again, I wasn't interested. In May 2017, we achieved our 1st star. In July of 2017, I submitted our application for quality improvement, and by mid-July of 2017, our application had been approved. Still not totally convinced of what the outcome may look like, I had nothing to lose. I met with the Cincinnati Preschool Promise representative, and shortly after that, I met my coach. When I was asked to share today, I thought about my coach, and so I looked up the definition of a coach. Coaching is a form of development in which a person called a coach, Cincinnati Preschool Promise, Deanna Lane, supports a learner or client, myself, Melina, Daddy's Daycare Child Development Center, in achieving a specific personal or professional goal by providing training and guidance. The coaching began with my role as the administrator and owner. We covered organizational structure, budgeting, staff evaluations, enrollment, and my favorite part, where everyone was sitting on the bus. Shortly after that, we moved into our preschool classrooms. By this time, I'm feeling quite confident. My coach conducted observations, and afterwards, she shares with me, "You can do this. You're not far." My response was, "Really?" Deanna goes on to say, "It's going to take commitment. You have already committed, but your teachers are going to have to be open and willing for change." I met with the teachers, and they were all excited. Deanna shared strengths and weaknesses. The weaknesses didn't seem bad at all because she gave suggestion and guidance on how to make the improvements. After reviewing observations and many discussions, I began to see the necessary changes that needed to take place. Of course, I'm sharing my thoughts and reasons every step of the way with my coach, but it always seemed that as the time got closer and closer to submit, and right before every next visit, something had changed, and of course, I had to keep her informed. She would say, "You can do it, you'll get through this." I felt renewed after every visit, which motivated me to keep going, and it allowed me to walk into every classroom encouraging and motivating children and staff. It was time to finalize. Deanna asked, "How far are you from a 4 or 5, Melina?" I didn't know, so she gave me my final task to figure it out. I uploaded all documents, and guess what? It was showing 5 stars. We continue to support the staff with mock interviews, classroom observations, and chat sessions up until the day of our quality visit. The very thing that you think that is going to take you out is what may propel you to the highest level of quality care. Cincinnati Preschool promise, Deanna Lane, we are very thankful for your commitment, your passion, and your unending determination, which has allowed us to achieve a 5-star rating and provide the highest level of quality care. Thank you.
Excuse me, thank you very much. As you could hear, people really appreciated that. Sometimes they have questions though, but they're always friendly questions. So I don't know if people would like to say anything. The board members first, please.
I have a comment. That's a hard act to follow. But I want to know how you feel now being a 5-star quality center. How do you really feel?
And I appreciate that because how I feel now is we've achieved it, and where do we go from here? You know, and it is also a question I've asked my coach. We've gotten to the 5-star, but there's a renewal process that has to take place that I'm totally unfamiliar with. So, like I said, we're in the West End community. Most of our staff live in the West End, so this has been a huge accomplishment for them as well, that there is a quality rated center in their community. But the work's not over, you know, and I was saying to myself, it's only just began. So we're hoping going forward that we'll get continued support from Cincinnati Preschool Promise assistance each year hereafter.
My sense was that Deanna's back there, is that?
Yes.
So, you know, as we were saluting you, it struck me that that must have been Deanna, and we should be saluting you too. Could you stand up so we
Yes.
could? Thank you. I bet you, Deanna, that you have this kind of moment where you now know why you do what you do.
Absolutely.
Right, right. It's so important. Greg had a question? No? Okay, thank you. Thank you once again. Between all of this, it's good to have a sense of the community and what's going on out there, where we are and where we need to go. So thank you very much. I can see, Debbie, why you hate to follow that.
I sure do.
Because you have to.
Well, I hope I don't bring tears to your eyes with my report. It's certainly very humbling to really face why we're really here. And we are really here because of the people who have spoken before me. And I will try to, with assistance from Jacob, make this as relevant and quick as possible. So you have in your packet, and it was mailed to you, a conflict of interest guidance sheet. And I'd just like to tee this up for Jacob. We've been working since November of last year on the development of the governance principles. And one of the cornerstones is disclosure and transparency, and something that sounds pretty onerous called conflict of interest. The guidance sheet that you have in front of you really is a pathway for board members to understand the parameters that we're working in the public domain, and to administer this basically as individuals first and as a board or a team. So Jacob has agreed to help us out today by going through the document behind the cover sheet that talks about the pathway that this really is. for managing conflicts in the public sector. So here is a generic checklist that Jacob is going to highlight some of the things that we need to be aware of as board members as we think about our individual duties for transparency and governance.
I'm going to cheat a little bit. I'm not going to exactly go through this because you have this, and so you can read this. But I think I want to talk a little bit more broadly about it, because the thing that really confuses a lot of people is understanding that the law kind of contemplates, okay, if you are conflicted, then X, Y, and Z, right? And so I'll assume you haven't read it yet, but the spoiler alert here is that if you find that you have a conflict of interest, we'll talk about what that means, then you shouldn't be voting on an action, a transaction, et cetera, with the kind of presumption that you can't act in the best interest of preschool promise if you have something that's personal to you, whether that's a financial interest or a personal interest. What the law doesn't help us with that clearly is, okay, what is a conflict of interest? When is a conflict present? I think that is what really confuses people, but also it's the thing that you're probably most interested in. Saying, okay, maybe I have a conflict, maybe I don't, how do I know? Step one is there's a personal component of this, okay? If you think you have a conflict, and this is reflected in the governance principles, it's really nothing new, but if you think you have a conflict, err on the side of disclosure. Don't hold it in. And then it's really up to the rest of the board or your committee, whoever's making that decision, to decide, okay, there is a conflict here, or we're comfortable moving forward, there's not a conflict here. So then step two is to say, okay, but what is a conflict? And I say the law doesn't help us very much here because it just says a financial or a personal interest. There's a little bit more to it than that, but they leave it purposefully broad. And the reason why they do that is because the second that they create a bright line rule, we're just going to find 8 million ways around it, and those pesky lawyers will help you with that. And so they want to leave that pretty broad so that it encompasses a lot of different things. That could be something as simple as I have an interest in an entity and I have a decision over that entity. I have the ability to appoint somebody, and that's my mother or my sister or my brother or somebody that's going to be appointed, right? There's an example of a financial interest. There's an example of a personal interest. The gray area here, and what further I think confuses people, is that there's always a continuum. And so, am I conflicted? Because I get these questions all the time, right? It's always followed up by hypotheticals. Okay, what if this and what if that? And it is always facts and circumstances, case by case. But many people will say, am I conflicted if my brother's sister, my brother's girlfriend's college roommate, et cetera, is involved in this? And I can't really tell you that with that kind of myopic hypothetical, right? So I'm trying to stay broad here, but I'll tell you that if you think that you're conflicted, and usually that's a feeling. I know that's not a legal answer, but usually it's a feeling. You're going to have a pretty good idea of whether or not you're conflicted. The personal component is to be candid about it and to disclose it. There's also a semi-watchdog feature here while remaining civil. There's a semi-watchdog feature here that if you're aware that somebody else is conflicted, they're not disclosing it, it's in the best interest of the organization for you to say, hey, maybe this is a conflict that we need to address further. So what you've got here is a great checklist, because this is kind of, it starts with like the at-risk areas where maybe a conflict is present. It talks about, employment decisions, because this isn't really just, it doesn't pertain just to managers either, right? So this is officers of the company, and maybe they have some other capacities outside, maybe they're a board member of another organization. What may be a conflict in one instance might not be a conflict in another. So again, disclose it, have the board vote on it, and decide whether or not they think that a conflict is present. With that kind of very broad but 30,000 foot overview, I kind of want to open up to questions. I don't know if you've got a question, we'll try to keep it generic. Let's try not to be specific in this particular conversation, but I'm happy to walk you through if you had a question about anything that's in here, or how that law works, et cetera.
Jacob, thank you very much for being here. As he said, we received this in advance, had the opportunity to review it. My suspicion is that most people around the table, if not everybody around the table, has kind of been through this drill in one organization or another. I liked your sense that instinct serves you well. You know, if you have a sense that you are, or even could be, maybe this is a conflict, it's always best to err on the side of disclosure. But does anybody have any specific question they'd like to bring to Jacob or Debbie on this?
I guess I have a question, and that is, we filled out conflict of interest statements in the past, and has the governance committee with you or singularly looked through them and identified things that you think might fall into the conflict? And will we know, because one of the things is, if, you know, you said if we suspect somebody does have a conflict. Well, my guess is that knowing our board pretty well, that we would disclose if we thought of it, but we might not think of it. And so I guess my question of the committee is, are you giving people a heads up to say, we think this might fall into that category, and these might be the kind of areas where you might not vote?
Let me answer that. It took us a while to collect all the conflict of interest forms. Let me just be defensive about that. And so we got to the beginning of the year after being able to do that. So we reviewed those. We took a look at them and we sent them over to Jacob. And so we have kind of, if you will, packaged them. There are 15 of us. And for the most part, I would say 10 are very straightforward. There are 3 to 5 of us where there are potential conflicts of interest. So the next steps are to really talk with those individual managers about what we saw. The other part of it is we need to revise that conflict of interest form, because we don't think that that really works the way it should for this body. I think it was some template that somebody got from somewhere last year. So where we believe that the discussion after this is necessary, there will be discussion and reasons
And,
for
and
that. So
speaking
that
of disclosure, I was part of that committee up until a number of months ago, and I just didn't know what, if you know, we were right at that,
we
that
are,
spot, and you've gone farther.
yes,
on
we
that.
are at that spot. So this is teeing up
Yeah,
the next step, if you will.
okay.
And as you said, I think the governance principles, the code of ethics, the annual statement, all of that stuff, I believe that there's going to be maybe some minor tweaks here and there to that. I don't know if that's certain or not, but as the organization evolves, we're kind of really honing the edge, if you will. And so, you know, I think you kind of were hitting on, there's a component of this where, okay, if we're aware, maybe we don't know of it, what is a conflict? I'd also add, I like kind of using this as an example, what I call the judge's standard, if you will. Okay, so I don't know if there's another attorney in the room, but it goes something like this. For lawyers, you can't take a representation if you're actually biased. Okay, that's the standard. So if a client comes to me and asks me to represent that client, and I know that I'm not going to be able to zealously advocate on his or her behalf because I've got some conflict internally, right? I should not take that. That's an actual conflict. But judges also have a code of ethics. And the judge's code of ethics says not only can you not be biased, but you cannot have the appearance of a bias, the appearance of impropriety. And when you think about why that is, it's because the public puts trust in judges. The public puts trust in the entire justice system. And so the second that they start thinking, whether it's true or not, if the public loses trust in that institution, the problem is significantly larger. At any time we have a CPP question like that, I think we use the judge's standard, which is not only what does the law say, but also the public spotlight is rightfully on CPP. Public dollars, public meetings, all of that. And we're performing a very, very important goal. So I think it's important also when you're thinking, do I have a conflict? Does somebody else have a conflict? And how do we handle these things? And maybe part of this somehow gets incorporated into the governance principles as we evolve, but keep in mind that judge's standard too. How is the public going to perceive this? Whether, if I think I'm actually conflicted, go a step further. Think, how does this look?
So Deb, you made a comment, you said there are 3 or 4 that have potential conflicts.
Potential conflict.
So how deep did you have to dig to determine that, or was it just based on information that was put into the document?
It was based on information that was put into the document by the individuals.
Okay.
And so there probably will be further questions based on this checklist and the conversation we're having today with the individuals. And
So those
how
are
the-
direct,
I'm sorry?
it could be potentially
Yes.
direct conflicts,
Yes.
but not indirect.
Potentially, without thinking about the 3 to 5, I'm one of them, I'll be, candid with you about that. But we really have to have a conversation with each one of the individuals to see if it's direct or indirect. And basically, when we looked at it, we said we are not going to ask anyone, to leave the board or recommend anything like that, but just be clear on circumstances in which you may not be able to vote on specific issues. And it could get, so we've got to get that kind of clarity with those individuals on things that you can't vote on or things that you would be a very apparent conflict of interest. So part of it's timing. We're working as fast as we can to have those conversations. But I asked, Jacob is an attorney. He's my friend, and I didn't want to introduce him as our attorney. And I think he's done a real good job of working with the governance committee and the staff on this. So we wanted to tee this up for the board, to be sure that we all understand our responsibilities and are comfortable with it. And we are a team, and we're new too. And part of it is we're new to this, but we do have a very important responsibility for governance and transparency.
Let me ask a question based upon what you said. I'm guessing that our approval of this guidance sheet kind of is a seal of approval from us all that here's the standard to which we're going to hold ourselves and the like, and as well, our approving it will therefore allow tweaks in the existing conflict of interest statement so as to make it more applicable to the work that this organization does. Is that correct? And so as we do that, then so we approve this, then you'll work on sort of version 2.0 of the conflict of interest statement. Meanwhile, having those conversations with particularly impacted individuals about conflicts that they may have and how to mitigate those conflicts in terms of the actual voting behavior and things like that. Having conflicts is not a bad thing.
No, it's not a bad thing.
It's only a bad thing when it's not managed appropriately.
Right.
So.
Exactly, and I think that's a very important point
Right.
to make, Dr. Graham. So part of this also is state of readiness to vote on this today, but we really do, if we don't vote on it today, if there's not a state of readiness, we really do need to vote on it.
Well, let's just see what happens. So I'll entertain a motion to approve the conflict of interest guidance sheet that was circulated in the pre-read, if anybody would like to do that.
So moved.
Thank you, Cheryl. Is there a second? So is there, thank you, Pastor Tate, and Cheryl. Is there any further discussion on it?
I would just want to restate, my point is when you take a look at those 3 to 5 individuals, if updating this or tweaking this implicates, I don't want to use that word, it's too strong, may require more details from them, I would ask that we take a look at the whole slate and not just those 3 to 5.
Right.
That's fair.
Because a change in standard that
Yeah.
impacts some may impact all.
Yes, sir.
Right,
That's
right.
correct.
I think
Gotcha.
that's fair.
And so I'm hoping, I've never sat on the board before, that if there's something that one of us, that you will make an individual effort to talk to us and say, okay, if you're voting on X, Y, and Z, that might be a conflict of interest. So that we know, because some of us might, just like she said before, I don't know.
That's exactly what I would urge, so that the conflict looks like this. Therefore, under these circumstances, you're going to need to recuse yourself from voting. And typically, the way that's done is by the person saying that they're recusing themselves, or that they're abstaining because of. And that way, there's a track in the minutes so that if anybody wonders if there was a conflict of interest, it's documented that the person purposely recused themselves.
Transparency.
Yep, transparent, good word. Any other questions before I call for a vote on this? Terry, please.
One is, I see that it's going to be completed, one of these forms is going to be completed annually. Is that because
Right.
those conflicts may occur between the time
Yes.
that you
Or
sign one?
change.
Yeah, that
Right,
just change.
people's
Yes.
circumstances change,
Yeah.
exactly, right,
Yes.
yeah.
Okay.
yeah.
And again, this year, we're better positioned to get those back quicker. And the timing, no, seriously, the timing will be around the annual meeting to get them, out before the annual meeting and get them, back as quickly as possible.
I think we can all see why you really hated to follow the mission moment.
People started leaving.
This is the kind of important sort of internal work that has to happen, though, regrettably, for an organization. So if there are no further comments, questions, all those in favor of approving the guidance sheet, say aye. Aye. Those opposed or abstaining? Debbie, thank you very much. Is there any other update that you'd like to?
Just real quickly, we are going to have a working session of this committee in August to go through the guidance principles again. We have also asked nominating organizations for their nominations. Our meeting for appointments at our annual meeting on September 18th. These have to go to the United Way. Prior to that, they have a meeting, an executive committee meeting on July 24th. That's the first benchmark. And then they have a board meeting on the week of August 20th. So that's the last date in that we could get them to approve. And I think all of the nominating organizations are aware and working on that. So I think we're in a good position for that also.
Yeah, so there's probably by the next meeting, I think that's what we
Thank you. I want to thank Jacob.
Jacob, thank you very much for being here today.
being
Appreciate it.
here. And you will be hearing.
Thank you. Gary Lundgren isn't able to be with us today, and so I'm going to ask Shiloh Turner instead to brief us on where the cost of quality work is that we know is so important.
Yes, absolutely. So, as you all know, Gary stepped off the board for a time, but is back on, and he is the chair of the Cost of Quality Committee. So I've been working with him to get him back up to speed with where we've been and where we're going. We do have the next Cost of Quality Committee meeting scheduled for June 25th at 10 a.m. here. In addition to that, another few updates that I'd like to provide is that we do have an upcoming provider forum on the wage results, which is to take place here next Tuesday, June 19th, right here in this very room, in fact, from 6 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. We currently have 85 providers.
You're gonna need a bigger room.
To attend. We're going to get the whole room. We're getting the whole thing. But we felt it was very important to circle back to the providers that provided information for us to complete this wage survey. We wanted them to be informed about what the results were, and also to have them, give them the opportunity to have small group discussion with providers to discuss both the reactions to the data and to gather key insights to continue to advance the work. So much like some of the people that have provided testimonials to us this morning, I think, or earlier this afternoon, we will have additional resources from at least 85 providers, perhaps more, by next Tuesday, that will give us additional input on a good path forward. So that's really exciting. Also partnering with the Workforce Development Council Committee, People for Early Childhood, which is the group, many of whom you've heard from earlier today. I have had a meeting and discussion with them regarding a provider session that they convened on June 9th around wage, and they're going to provide additional results shared at the meeting of the early childhood education stakeholders tomorrow morning, of which I am a member and others are as well. So they're going to continue to provide an additional feedback loop for what they've been hearing from their membership, as well as the Workforce Development Council has been doing some listening sessions, and they're going to provide that. So we're really trying to keep that line of communication and input going. in as many directions as we can to ensure that we are informed in our process going forward. Additionally, yes, did you have a question?
I do, but I'll let you finish.
Okay. Additionally, we do have an upcoming community forum on wage results that we also felt was important. That's going to be Tuesday, June 26th, also at the United Way from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. And the UC Economic Center will provide an overview of the results as well. And we will follow that with a response panel that will be comprised of Workforce Development Council members and providers so that they can give us their perspectives on this information.
I'm sorry, what time is that?
That was from, I believe it's actually 4:30 to 6. Is that right, Mary?
I think it is
4:30 to 6 on June 26th. And of course, anyone is welcome to attend either of those or both. I also recently met with the leadership from the Child Poverty Collaborative and the Women's Fund of the Greater Cincinnati Foundation to learn more about their efforts around living wage and determine how we might partner. As I'm sure the members of this board realize, this issue is critically important, but goes well beyond CPP. It's an issue that's important for our entire community. And those two entities in particular, I think, are well positioned and poised to be working on this as well. So wanted to ensure that we were at the ready to be partners in any work and direction that they were doing as well.
And when are those meetings?
The Child Poverty Collaborative and Women's Fund was just an individual meeting that I did. I reached out to them.
Oh, I see.
It may follow with subsequent activity, but we haven't determined that yet. And then finally, we had I was asked to present to the Special Projects or Major Projects Committee of City Council and presented on CPP a couple weeks ago. And in that meeting, Councilmember Landsman, and I'm sorry he stepped out, I was hoping he could add on to this, but he introduced a motion to support community-based providers through tax relief. And the motion includes partnering with CPP, 4C, Community Action Agency. And I just wanted to underscore how grateful we are for that and that we look forward to partnering with them to move this work forward on a policy level, which I think is a really critically important dimension of this work. And then finally, we are hiring a program and policy manager to lead this work, and that is not the whole body of that position, but it is a primary aspect of that work, and that is currently listed, and it's on our website, and hopefully we will have a really strong applicant pool. It's open for another, I think, week or so. So that's the cost of quality update. Happy to take questions or field comments.
Let me just say that I'm really gratified, Shiloh, by your wrapping your arms around this and moving the agenda forward, because we know that this is a critically important piece of the agenda that's lagged behind the tuition assistance and the quality improvement. So, hats off to you. It occurs to me, with all of these meetings happening over the course of the next week or so, a little bit more, cost of quality meets on the 25th, the community forum is the next day. I would very much appreciate it if at the end of all of that, if you would do a summary as to kind of what you've heard, what seems to be the next steps recommended from it, and what the time frame for those next steps might be. That would go out then as an update to all the board, because again, this is something that we're very, very aware of, tuned into, want to make sure it moves forward, and so the more we can stay on top of this piece of work, I think the better.
Happy to do that.
But again, I want to thank you. Other questions or comments?
Would it be possible to add into that summary so that we can better understand any roadblocks or barriers or unintended consequences that we're finding are arising from this? I know it's a rather complex issue, and I think the better we understand those challenges, the better we can wrap our minds and efforts around ways to overcome them. Thank you.
Others?
I just wanted to clarify on the parent or community engagement night, that was June 26th. So are there 2 preschool promise events on that day?
There are, yeah.
Okay.
There's one that Flo is hosting for parents, and then this one is for the community. It just happened that they both got scheduled on the same day.
Do do we think that's a conflict of targeting the same group of people, or do you think different people will really be interested in?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that won't happen in the future. We've got our calendar figured out. That was just kind of
So where is Flo's meeting?
at the public library on Vine Street downtown.
Anyone else? Greg Landsman is back now, if you'd like to thank him.
Thank you, Greg. I
Greg.
mentioned that in our, on my update to your committee that you introduced a motion around this, and I just wanted to acknowledge and thank that. Thank you for that.
So it passed, I don't know if it passed, and the administration will give us a report sometime in the next week or two on what incentives we can provide center-based, home-based providers in terms of both quality and wages. The challenge is the current property tax incentives support new development or upgrades to existing facilities, though that could be helpful. And the income tax is hard to touch, but there's potential ways for us to provide a refundable credit for workers. And it's,
By when did you say that you
you'll
might?
have a report back in hopefully by the next meeting.
Which would, our next
Yeah,
meeting?
yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it won't be, we ultimately would have to, as a council, decide to set the money aside.
Right.
but-
This is the first step in that direction.
Yeah, the
Understood.
challenge, yeah.
I was just thinking, Shiloh resumed a number of meetings that are coming up, and so I asked her to provide on or about July 1, after all those have happened, kind of where are we, what's the conversation, what are the next steps?
Yeah, we should have something. Oh,
So I was thinking that that could potentially be, news from there could potentially be a part of this update. Good. Thanks very much. Oh, sure, I'm sorry.
No, we have you said there will be a forum, at the forum on the 26th, there'll be a panel. And
Yes.
there'll be different individuals. You say you have parents and providers on that panel?
No, we have representatives from the Workforce Development Council and providers.
Any other questions for Shiloh?
Just quickly, one relationship leverage question. Are you working with Margaret Holbert in any way on public policy for a lot of labor in this issue?
Yes, absolutely, and more importantly, at the state level.
Right.
We actually have a handful of entities that are not exactly like CPV that are doing quality early childhood education in places like Dayton, Cleveland. Columbus is less far along, but we actually just convened that group last week at the state level to talk about some things that we can do at the state level policy-wise, as well as what we can do and learn from one another as we continue to kind of move down this road together. So absolutely. Margaret's an awesome resource. We're really lucky to have her.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much. Just as Shiloh had to fly solo without Gary, so Pastor, you have to fly solo without Hector. But we know you can do it.
Well, one of the things that has happened this month that normally doesn't happen is that our Finance and Audit Committee has not met prior to our board meeting. So we don't meet for another 2 weeks. So any details or instructions, comments, and concerns that Hector would present have not been presented for this month. So what we want to do is remind everybody that in our last meeting, we did adopt our fiscal year 19 budget. And there were some, not significant changes, but some things that Hector put in that are going to be instrumental in how we function and flow in this next fiscal year. I'll also present that we have some additional challenges because we really need to start thinking about how we're going to handle the underspend. Hector has really worked hard to keep us up to speed with there will be an underspend, so there will be money available that we're going to roll into our next fiscal year. And we really need to talk about how we want to inject that in some way, whether it be a pilot, whether that be put additional funds on other line items where we think we may have some significant increase, whatever the case may be. But the goal is not to let it sit or not have someone attended to it before we kick off our next year in September. So that's the only concern that I have.
When is the next meeting of the Finance and Audit Committee?
24th, I think, June.
Good, good. Which sort of also aligns with a lot of this other work that's going on, and so.
28th, I'm sorry.
So, well, good, good, good. So, we should be in a better position with respect to the cost of quality conversation as we make decisions about those unspent funds. John, you have a question?
How big is the underspending?
Right now, we are, based on the last report, we are probably about total 3.6 million, based on Hector's report.
It's underspent versus what we expected going into the year.
Yes, sir. That's where we are currently, based on fiscal year, as of April 30th, we're currently running an underspend. And each category, of course, is calculated here, but we are about 2.7 million under our programs and about 3.6 million total.
Does that mean we're enrolling fewer people than we estimated?
Yes, sir. Our tuition assistance is probably our greatest underspend right now.
I think the big objective would be to get more people enrolled.
Yes, sir. To that point, our cost of quality and our quality improvement efforts are going to hopefully bridge the gap there and help open some seats so we can enroll more students. Yes, sir.
The irony in this, in some ways, is we have the same amount of money coming in every year, right? Knowing that we're going to ramp up the number of people who are in the seats over a period of years. And so, in some ways, this the underspend could be anticipated. I don't mean to say at all that we shouldn't redouble our efforts to put kids in seats at all, but I understand the reason for it. And so then the question becomes, well, now how do we address the issue and make sure that we can push resources behind achieving the various goals for which the CPP was chartered.
Question in my mind still is, with the budget 15 million a year, whatever it is, 14.8, and knowing we have quality improvement, what is the run rate we should expect to reach in terms of enrollment? As we project out, as you say, Father, we're going to build up year to year, but what is the run rate we should be expecting to reach within that budget? You know, when we get to year 2 or year 3, what is that number? I just don't know.
Yeah, well, and that has to be balanced against, as we've said, we've got a $15 million budget to accomplish a $50 million task, and so that there would be multiple variables engaged here, right? That if we've got cost of quality, quality improvement, and tuition assistance, then more of this means less of those, right? And so the question becomes how to optimize all of that.
I want to make a correction here, Mr. Pepper. Our significant underspend is going to be in quality improvement and not tuition assistance.
We still need to get kids in seats.
Correct. Most definitely.
Any more questions for Pastor Tate on that? So I'll go over to, John and Mary to talk about community engagement, eh?
Very far away.
Yeah. The Community Engagement Committee met a couple weeks ago and talked about a few things that I wanted to highlight today. First of all, I gave the committee an update that we are jointly working with CPS on an annual report, which will be launched in July. So working very closely with my counterpart, with Cheryl and her team, to really report out some basic year 1 statistics and then some stories and anecdotes from the year. We are also very focused on finding a P team member who is bilingual. That was a large conversation that we had during the committee meeting. So we followed up on connections that the committee had, but still haven't had any luck to find anyone. So I throw that to the entire board. If you have connections, please let me know. We know that this is a definite need in the community to reach out to families who need some bilingual support. And then finally, we spent a good portion of time talking about kind of next steps for the committee. So during this last year, while we were ramping up, it was really helpful to get the committee together to talk through kind of basic community engagement. What does that mean? What does that look like? And that's been very helpful. But for the next year, kind of thinking through what would be a good use of the committee's efforts and expertise. And so we had a conversation about potentially addressing the barrier of summer coverage and having the committee focus on that for the next year. And John and I just had a conversation before this as to what next steps would look like for that. So figuring out, how much would we need to support summer coverage? What could that look like? What would fundraising look like? Who would we need to pull together to make that happen? And so the committee's focused on kind of thinking through next steps to focus their efforts for the next year.
John?
Well, I just pick up on the Latino. We must find someone who is bilingual to be able to reach out to that community. So any ideas any one of you have to give to Mary, please do. We've had a couple that apparently haven't worked out yet, but we'll get this. The other, on the summer school, we were asked, as Mary indicated, and we embrace a study of exactly what would be involved in providing summer school. We don't have that now in a lot of the schools, and we all know notion you lose half a grade, maybe a third of the grade by that absence. This is going to be another one of those, I think of them as parking lot issues. We know we need money we don't have now to be able to really complete the task here. And so we'll undertake here to find the right people to talk to, and any ideas you have on who we should talk to, how we might do this. Any one of you want to be part of this small group to really understand how we might do this more efficiently, what would be a model for providing quality summer schools support during that period of time we'd like to have. So I don't know, Terry, if you might be willing to help on this, but we need ground level input on how to approach this. So if any one of you would be willing to, and this won't be too time consuming. We're talking about a meeting or two to figure out what's the right model to do this, and then we'll have to figure out what it costs, and then where would you get that money? Another one I know here is in that same issue, which I know Shiloh's worked on, is transportation. We've known from the beginning we've got major challenges in transportation, in getting moms and dads and kids to the right place in some of these quality deserts particularly. And tying in with the chamber or with others on that, because that is a barrier of high magnitude that we have to address. You can't do all these things at once. That's a systemic barrier that we've got to look at. So more later. Anyone on the bilingual side or on the summer school design side would really appreciate your help.
That is so important for that summer school design side, because if you're looking at wage parity, if we're not getting paid during the summer, we can't keep those $15 an hour up.
I understand.
So we would have to lay those people off, and that's not going to do them any good. So we need to have a year-round system.
If you could join us for a meeting on this subject, I'd appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you.
We want to know, we just had a meeting with another group, and Santa Maria was very instrumental in providing bilingual home visitors for a program that we were doing through the Poverty Collaborative. And we may want to check with Santa Maria.
Who would you contact?
I'll find out for you.
Would you send me contact or send Mary a contact?
Yes, thanks, guys.
Can you reach out to the Hispanic Chamber?
I would have, yes. Yep.
Yeah, Santa Maria said so.
I'll send you a name for Carla Boulder and Michael Beck.
Yeah, I know both. If you could give me an email or a phone number, that would be great. Thank you.
Other questions from Mary and John? Thank you very much. So, Shiloh, you're on.
All right.
What do you think you're going to be doing next year?
I think we know what we're going to be doing in the next year. This was in your packet last month, but we didn't address it because of other issues that were discussed. So this document, and mine is a little longer than yours. I apologize. This font is tiny, tiny, tiny. So I will certainly circulate this electronically with you, but I'll walk you through what we've created here and would love to get your feedback and going forward, how we plan to use this document. So we as a team, our staff created an OGSM, which is Objectives, Goals, Strategies, and Measures. And we've identified 5 major goals for year 2 of the Cincinnati Preschool Promise. We have identified 3 to 5 key strategies within each of the goals, and then we've identified measures that will be able to track our support. We have a by when column, so we have kind of a targeted goal for when to achieve various milestones, by whom, and then what the status is. And that status column says R/Y/green. That means red, yellow, green. And what we will do each, and I'll ask for your feedback on how frequent you would like this updated, but what we'll do is we'll update by strategy where we are. You know, if we're firing on all cylinders, we'll be green. If we are, you know, kind of in process, but on target to reach goals, that would be yellow. If we're behind schedule for whatever reason, we'll flag that as red. But I think this will just give us the ability, this as the board, the ability to track progress over time. So our 5 goals are, the first is to increase the number of children enrolled in fiscal year 19 in quality community providers. The goal is to 700. We have a stretch goal up to 900, and that's been built into our budget numbers for fiscal year 19. And that's, of course, again, I underscore on the community provider side of things, the CPS numbers would get added in addition to that. The second goal is to increase the number of quality preschool seats.
Under what assumptions for percent of federal poverty level have those goals been set?
So the 700 is really as we stand currently with the 200% and
Right.
below. The 900 stretch goal is if we expand to 300, which is again built into our
Right,
fiscal year
exactly.
19 budget.
That was
So
what
we
prompted the
anticipate-
question,
Yes,
yeah.
exactly. So we do anticipate being able to grow more should that income threshold increase. The second
Can
goal.
I ask on that?
Yeah, sure.
The last time we talked we were waiting for something from CPS to be able to go out and publicize the 300 versus the 200. Are we now in a position where we can go publicly all the way to 300?
They're working their way through their budget process. I'm not certain exactly where they are. Do you know, Laura?
I thought that you were going to get together with them.
Yeah, well, Cheryl and I are
Yeah.
going to connect, but we
Yeah.
haven't since.
Well, the sooner we can get the word out.
Absolutely.
This is
Right.
Absolutely.
recruiting time.
That's right. Yeah, we're definitely on it. We'll move it.
They should tell us now. Would they disagree with the 300?
I don't think so.
I don't think they disagree with it. It was a question of they hadn't built their budget yet in the way that we had in terms of those trigger points. And so the question was how, and we haven't got Cheryl with us, unfortunately. And so the question was constructing their budget so that it would work. So I don't think there's a lack of interest in it. It's, nor do I want to simply call it a technical detail.
Well, I would think that, I think it's just comes down to now just making it, going into approval. And I'm trying to think when, there's a board meeting.
There's a board meeting on the 25th.
I know, but they just, at Monday's meeting, they flanked around with all the July meetings. I know, that's a technical term, but they, so I'm not sure, because I know they cut one July meeting out. But I will make sure that, I know, just noticed the other day, when is things for the board minute, so I will put that on. But
Greg, there's a question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So I missed the last end of last month's meeting, but, so the decision was made if CPS agrees that we would go to 300% for 3 and 4-year-olds?
that was what was agreed at the last, I keep looking at
Finance.
Yeah.
finance meeting. That's the committee that I'm giving up.
This board hasn't decided that yet.
What I recall from the meeting is we agreed to go to 250.
Right.
We were gonna check it. Hector wanted to check it, I think it did, in August or September, to see takeout rate
Right.
with the hope that we could go to 300. That
So
was the way
it
we
depends
got it.
upon trigger points, if you will.
Yeah.
And that was 2 meetings ago, because I was present for that discussion, and I wasn't at the last one, so it's a plan for how to.
Was our last one, I'm just going to, it also was.
Also, it was came back up again. Okay.
Yes, it did. So I
So
think.
it's
that-
kind of contingent, if
Yeah.
you will.
Jen said that the board has to say that that's okay, and that hasn't come up. She hasn't brought that, she just barely got in her budgets.
Well, and in fact, that there was a question of whether we should approve, last month, whether we should approve going to 300. But Cheryl reminded us that the number that was on, that CPS is ready to move forward on was 250. And so they wanted to have a heads up about 300, to kind of build the same contingency into the budget that we had. So that was trying to align the two of us. So right now, what's been approved is the 250 with the idea, and we're generally in favor of, but want to wait for CPS to catch up to the 300% level.
Okay, I'll continue to walk through this. The second goal is to increase the number of quality preschool seats by 200 during fiscal year 2019, and that was outlined in the master agreement, and then you can just track through to see the strategies, measures, and et cetera. The third goal is to increase.
Tell me,
Yes.
just,
Sure.
so if we increase quality seats by 200 next year, we'll realize some of the increment in terms of kids in seats next year, but the bulk of it in the following year?
I think I'm gonna look to Brittany for that, but I think some will open up sooner in the year than
Yeah.
others, and so it will kind of be staggered throughout the course of next year.
Right.
And it depends on how many people get to quality, how quickly, and how many seats that does create. It could be more rapid than I think we originally projected, but
Yeah.
we're
At this
hopeful
point-
of that, right?
At this point, we just have no history of knowing how this process works, you know?
Or how many people this year, how many seats did you?
So they haven't all been announced yet, but we're expecting approximately 180.
Wonderful.
That's good, Brittany. You just,
Yeah.
gold star next to Brittany's name today, boy. Thank you.
So the plan here is to have your 2 contracts in place by July 1?
Yes, and we're working through that process, so I expect to extend an extension of year 1 contracts until we can properly navigate year 2, if you will, but with all of the partners that we have currently. So we're being very transparent with them about where we are in that process. And, as we have many learnings through year 1, we want to make some tweaks and improvements to year 2 and beyond.
So when will
Just
those
like July
contracts
1,
be
so-
available?
Right, so by July 1, we will have at least a temporary extension to
Extension.
year 1
Perfect.
contracts.
Yeah.
And because the work will not stop, let me be clear, the work is not stopping because July 1, we don't have, a brand new contract. What we will do is have some extension with a renewal year 2 once we get to that stage.
Okay, so the extension will be available by July 1st?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. And will that open up the contracts, like, for August? Is that what you want the contract signed by August?
I think the renewal
Or
will.
the renewal by August?
I think what we'll do is we'll have year 2 contracts by August, but in the interim, we don't want the work to stop. And so we're doing the temporary year 1 extension to be able to continue the work.
When would that be communicated to the provider?
We're working through that now. You mean the vendors, like 4C, CAA, is that who you're talking about again? The third goal is to increase understanding of wage dynamics, and you see some of the strategies there. I think this, as we've talked several times already this afternoon, is the biggest work in progress. So honestly, even these strategies may evolve throughout the course of the year, but this is what we're setting forward currently. Goal 4 is to increase.
Sharon,
Yes.
I have a concern. The wording, increase understanding of wage dynamics, is not the objective to increase the wage, as opposed to the understanding.
I had the same reaction. This doesn't feel as strong enough of a goal. I don't have the right words, but we ought to be doing something.
The understanding, and then we need the action.
Yeah,
Right.
follow
Yeah.
action
That's right.
in this year.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, there's,
Because we're talking about a year,
Yep.
the whole
Yep.
year two, and it's not gonna take us a year to understand.
Better not.
That was
Right.
last year.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right. We
That's
should be
helpful.
in a position of
I think we
implementing
understand,
something. Yeah, we have to be able to come and implement something.
Right.
at this
we
point.
understand
We need to be implementing.
that there is a sense of urgency, but we
Right.
also understand that there's a need for prudence
Right.
in developing action.
Of course.
we know that we're going to understand dynamics more after the forum's coming up by the end of the month. That'll help move things forward. It strikes me that if I look at number 1 and then number 2, capture learnings of providers who have increased wages, there's a missing like 1.5, which means some providers have to have their wages increased. You know, and so it'd be nice to have a sense as to by when that would happen. And I almost think that if we set an ambitious target for fall, for a pilot, then we capture the learnings, not in March, but December, you know? That allows a kind of a review and rescale after the first of the year. Doesn't that sound, Kimya, thank you very much for slowing us down on this point.
Well, I mean, I'm used to hearing all in the fall CPS deals. The teachers, it's only because you pay the $15 an hour. And
What was
so-
that, Laura? What did you say?
I said, I'm always hearing CPS is stealing the teachers.
Mhm.
And it's because they start at $15 an hour. So, and so that, I think that would take that, a lot of that away.
Right. No, that's one of the things that we hear. I think one of the things that I picked up from our presenters earlier today was their passion for working in community provider centers, you know, and so that they want us to help make it financially feasible for them to make that choice, you know, so. Oh, I'm sorry, John, go ahead.
That's all I tried to communicate. I think you and I talked, Shiloh. I think this is probably maybe the most complex subject I think we're dealing with. And I believe we'll be getting this input, we'll get input from providers from these conferences. But I think there's going to be a need for a committee to come together with the right representation to think through what is the model to make this work. And what make it work. By that I mean, I think what we need is a plan that will, over time, starting now, increase the financial condition of community school providers. And we need to know, I think, what targets they are. But I think we need to be informed of what model of operation. I was struck by what Terry said in the last meeting, that there may be knowledge that can be provided on sources of income. I think there will be the issues of how big the provider needs to be to have scale that makes this possible. Part of it may be we need another funding source or some part of our $15 million to do this. I think we need to figure out what kind of a pilot, what is a pilot that would do this. But this to me, and I could be wrong, is extremely complex, and we'll be getting input, but I think there'll be the need for very creative strategic design that will need to be informed by folks like Terry, individually Terry. I think Greg should be part of this. And I suspect it will take a couple of months to figure out, with all that input, where do we go? I may not be at all these meetings, but I want to share that as a view, because this is a tough one. And I think the other thing is we don't know really how much money it would take in the long run. We're getting everybody to $15. I have no idea what the financial impact of that would be. And the main thing is, what are the total models? Because it's not just going to be dollar wages, I don't think. What will enable dollar wages will be other things that can be done. Revenue sources, cost savings, sharing, shared services. And I know some go on. Vanessa's told me that. that we already have some of that, but should we do more? And is there more to be learned from other cities? Let me stop with that. That's just the thought I wanted to share.
I think it's good that we're going to be hiring somebody on board who will oversee this work, just as we have people for the other two big buckets, right?
Yes, indeed.
So that's
Absolutely.
terribly important. What also strikes me, I think you're right, that this is really complicated, because if for no other reason, then this is a systems sort of thing. You push over here and it's going to move over there in a way that simply incentivizing people to go to be in seats doesn't operate the same quite a way. And so an opportunity that we might keep in mind, we've talked about having a pilot, and that's implied here. What it's not inconceivable to me that we might have a couple of different ones that change parameters in a couple of different ways,
Yeah.
and you see what happens as a
Yeah.
result,
Yeah.
and then import learnings from there into pilot number 3,
Yeah.
whatever. You know, so.
A lot of learning.
Right. But we need to start moving so we can start learning.
And begin to also assess the impact of other resources, like Greg was saying, the
Right.
city council with
Mhm.
the
Right.
tax relief and fundraising and other kinds of things. So it's a lot of things that are impacting this. So,
You know, John, what strikes me as you articulate that is that this is an incredibly complicated, the world we live in, project. It's going to require an incredibly precise project charter up front, because we're going to have to know what we're getting into, what are the parameters, what's within scope, what's not within scope, or the possible other factors that might influence this, as you've articulated. Right? So getting crystal clarity up front as to what the initial purview is for this project is going to be crucial as we hop in. So having somebody who understands project management at a very sort of precise level could be important as well.
Something we need to be careful of. I've worked with people before who need to have absolutely every single detail nailed down before doing anything, you know? And letting the perfect, in other words, be the enemy of the good, and we need to avoid that in this circumstance, it seems to me. So we spoke a moment ago, Shiloh, of having an update from you on or about July 1 after these various community sessions and so on. It strikes me that what you might do is sort of review the elements in this line of work, and say, you know, based upon the community sessions, based upon the feedback of the board, here's how I'm thinking about this now, how's it sound?
Yeah, that sounds great.
And if you look at, under the partnerships grant, workforce development is working on it as well. So we have a committee.
Right. Well, and the need for connection with them is
Exactly.
crucial.
And note that my CFA may come in handy here, so I would be more than happy to help as we go down this path, because I do think it's fascinating, and I know there is a path to success here. We just really need to get as much information as we can, put our minds to it, and make it happen.
Let me-
Do we need some public relations clarity though as well? Because I'm just hearing in the community direction of all preschool promise teachers will be $15 an hour by September. I don't get the sense that that is the direction the board would be heading in, that it would be more, are still working towards that as an end goal, with pilots being planned for the fall to enable that end goal. But based on the community engagement from the last 2 meetings, it's obviously an issue that most of the public is pretty passionate about, and I'd rather get in front of some of the public relations on it.
So I do think that's a great idea, because there's something in between what's on this paper and all teachers will have $15 an hour in 2 months. The problem is that whatever language we put forward is sort of subject to change. So something needs to be put out there, but language around pilots and dates and so forth is, we don't quite know yet. So what can a message be that tells people we are absolutely serious about this and moving forward with intent, without putting models or dates by it.
We're not going to solve that question in the
Yeah,
in the
yeah, that's
room.
just a thought.
That's a very good thought, Christine, thank you for raising that. And so here's something else that should be in the, this ever-lengthening email that Shiloh is going to send to us.
It sounds like a thesis.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Chapter 1.
And July 1, when our last meeting of this is June 28th.
Yeah, well, maybe.
Maybe July 1 isn't
Yeah.
quite,
But I hear the
We'll give you the
urgency
4th of
with
July
this.
weekend. Well, no, that's important,
That's
but,
right.
yeah, we all know this. In the interest of time, let's move. Let's see, we've given you enough feedback, I think, at this point.
I feel.
So let's move on, shall we, to
So,
brand awareness and
yes,
strength
so
and
quickly,
operations.
goal 4 is increasing positive brand awareness, and you see the 4 strategies there and the measures as well. And then our final goal is to continue to strengthen operations. Some of that is where you'll find things such as the United Way Service Agreement, any revisions or refinements to the master agreement. We are working closely with CPS on what I'm calling a unified data strategy, so that's the back and forth sharing of data so that we are then able to communicate impact of this initiative. So, and then of course, staffing, both personnel staff and volunteers and board to move that work forward. Do those sound like the right 5 goals?
So my quick observation is this is a comprehensive body of work, so well done, thank you. The one thing that I don't see here, and it's really more of an outcome than it is a strategy, is that ultimately we're trying to prepare more kids for kindergarten so they're ready to
Right.
learn. And there's nothing in here about tightening the measurement rubric so that we know that we are backtracking to having kids ready to learn in kindergarten. So, and I know work is being done, but is there a reason to call that out?
We can make that more explicit under the strengthening operations. I hear what you're saying.
You know, it's just picking up on that. We have this group in Cleveland, I think, Shiloh, who's doing our evaluation.
Columbus, yeah.
At some point during the year, I think it would be good, I know you're doing it, but to get some report to the board on how they're viewing their ability to get the results we're going to need to have 4 years from now when we go forward. And are they getting the data we need to show the impact of this as it goes forward? We haven't heard from them, it's too early, they're just, I guess, getting the groundwork and the baseline. But do they feel we're on a path with our system and getting the input they're gonna need so that 4 years from now or 3.5 years from now, we'll be able to go to the public and say, here's what this investment is doing in kindergarten readiness?
Yeah. My hope is to bring the evaluators back. As you'll recall, we brought them, I think it was in March, for an interim evaluation report, but it was just as you articulated. It was, you know, here's all of the various pieces of information we're collecting. My hope is to have them in front of this body again. Ideally, August, I think, is probably the more likely time frame because they'll be wrapping up year 1 results and they'll be able to tell us where they hit any stumbling blocks, if they hit them, and how they've overcome them and that sort of thing. And then also to provide year 1, at least process-related results, which would be great too. I'll aim for July, but I'm skeptical given the fact that we're toward the end of June. So August is probably more realistic.
Is this going to evolve and change over the course of the year? This isn't a document that gets approved and locked in, but will.
No, this is really what I wanted to bring forward to this group is to kick the tires, so to speak, on are these the right 5 goals? And, you know, let you start to see the staff's thinking around strategy, measures. What we have as a team then is whoever is on point for these various strategies and or goals, we kind of have and then it rolls back into a work plan for each of those. I would not bring that to this body. You don't need to know those details. But do know that it exists and that we are working those.
So the reason I ask that is because I'm really thinking that Steve is totally on point with this, and I don't know that it fits in operations necessarily, or the communications area, or it may fit in a variety of areas,
Right.
but communicating the so what is.
It's working, right.
Is essential to know if it's working
Yeah.
and to communicate that are going to be So
Yeah.
somewhere in here.
Well, isn't that ultimately the objective, right?
Right.
You know, GSM, that's the
Correct.
objective.
Right.
Mhm.
Correct.
Yeah, so then maybe, right now, the objective reads, CPP provides tuition assistance to 3- and 4-year-old students residing in the footprint of CPS by providing access to high-quality programs in partnership with Cincinnati Public Schools. So that,
Yeah.
I think, is where
Right.
we need to go with that.
Or it begins in order to.
In order to, right, there we
One
go.
or the other.
Yep.
Because that measurement of, kindergarten readiness is a test, which, I'm gonna be the first one to tell you that a test does not tell you everything about a child. And especially since the bulk of it is perfectly a sit-down test, and they do it. But there's also the part, when I look at that data, so I look at my children's data, or the children in certain schools' data about doing their KRA data. Their their academic sections are usually pretty good, and what is the hardest is the social emotional. And that, though it is kind of in the quality improvement portion, it needs to be even bigger, and needs to be bigger even in the kindergarten, because that's where, when we say the child is not success, they're on track, they're, yellow or they're red, really behind, and it's always because of that social emotional piece. And I want us all to be very aware that academics isn't everything, especially in.
And I would add, it's just a bit of a challenge, because I think we've already proven that if this then, this will follow. And the body of our work, as I see it, is not to prove that any further, although we need to be aware of if it's working or not.
Right.
But the mission for us is expanding access to quality preschool for all 3 and 4-year-olds in the city. So that, to me, is what we need to maintain our vision and focus on. Not that, well, if it didn't work or not.
Using my best improvisational skills, yes, and. The and part is we could do all that wonderful stuff, and it comes around to 4 years from now, and we can't prove that this work that made children ready for kindergarten. We're gonna have an awfully hard time telling our story to the voters of Cincinnati.
Right,
That's
and
true.
then, what I was speaking to was that we have to make sure that we are working with people like the Poverty Collaborative, because those are the things that I think hinder our children,
That's
more
exactly
so than us. We can provide them, as Terry and I can say, with a wonderful education, but we also have to improve on some of our support systems like mental health and things like that, because that's a big part of that measurement.
I just go back to second what you were saying. We embarked on this, I think most of us viewed it with quality pre-K, as we showed for success by 6, that if they have quality pre-K, 85 or 87% or some large number were reading on grade by the 3rd grade, and they're ready for kindergarten, and yet half of our children weren't ready for kindergarten. And it seems to me our objective is to take the half that weren't ready for kindergarten, get it up to 85%. And if we can't show with whatever measure is appropriate that our kids are greatly ready for kindergarten, we don't have a sale for the renewal of this levy or increasing it, which we'll need to do, in my opinion.
I think the purpose of this conversation has been well met, it seems to me, that you wanted to get feedback from the board around these goals. To me, the 5 buckets are the right buckets, and we provided feedback along the way about them. And so whoever, Sally, I think you raised the point about, is this going to be a static document or a dynamic document, that I think the next time we see it, it's going to be modified according to the comments that you have shared. And that we'll probably trot it out as a scorecard, every time and see where we're going, which will then also suggest places for tweaks and alterations. So thank you very much for this. The next item on the agenda is frequency of board and committee meetings.
Can I say one more thing?
Sure, yeah,
Sorry.
sorry.
I have an executive director's report written and prepared that I will just email to this group, and it highlights additional things beyond our big goals that I would like you to be aware of, but you can handle that in writing.
Perfect, thank you so much. So you recall,
Yeah, going back to 300% in favor of board meeting on Wednesday at 11 a.m. I don't know how quickly you all want to get some feel like you need board support, but they have a board meeting on Wednesday at 11, and I suspect that if you call Ryan or Caroline, whomever, they get it on the calendar, but I guess the idea is that if CPS says, yeah, we can get there, then we'd be able to tell providers that we're going up to 80% and then.
Well, so, not immediately, but we would want to see what happens with the 250 first, you know, what the take-up rate is, and then, right. Yeah,
Yes.
right. But thank you very much.
Yeah.
So frequency of board and committee meetings, you'll recall as we were getting started in this a year and a half ago now, that we realized that as a startup organization, we needed to be hands-on as a board in a way that boards typically aren't. Along the way, we have an executive director, we have staff, we have a staff that's going to grow by one person, as you just outlined for us, which is good news indeed. And so the question arises about our role and whether monthly meetings are necessary to accomplish that. And so this is not, I'm not going to make a proposal now, but I think this is something for us to have in mind as we approach the retreat in a couple of months. And that's how we see modulating our meetings going forward. So this gives us all time to reflect on that, I think. Where I would see us going eventually, whether it's at the annual meeting or subsequently, would be to going to an every other month schedule with the executive committee meeting in the off months of the board. And then the committees would need to sort of calibrate their own work around their workload and whatever the relevant calendar is for driving that work. And so I just want to frame that as a question that we'll circle back around to when we have the retreat. Sound good? Easy. Love things we don't have to make decisions on. So observers, Leisha, Greg.
I have no comments. Thank you.
Whatever I can do to help in terms of the board and CPS and the answer on the 250 and 300, because I think the faster that gets out there, the better.
Yes.
And then I'll send a note on the wages. I just went back and read the RAND report, which we did a couple of years ago, and it's just, I think, helpful to recognize in part why this is out there, you know, why we landed on this whole idea of wage parity and the way it would work in the financial model. But I'll send that around.
Here's a question and this is probably to tee up a larger conversation. I was thinking as we were having the conversation beginning with the public comments and then the spirited discussion. Well, then while you were out of the room, Shiloh briefed us on work that's going to be going on in, of course, the next couple of weeks, convening all kinds of groups to keep stirring this and getting feedback and the like, and then how it is we synthesize that into some way forward. And so we had the spirited conversation on box number 3. Here's a thought that occurred to me, that we all understand around this table that from day one, we weren't going to be providing preschool for every kid right in the region who was eligible for it. We understood that. There was going to be, as it were, kind of a ramp up to achieve that. Nor was it reasonable to think that we would instantly be providing quality improvement for every available, you know, that was going to have a ramp up. Well, what's the parallel ramp up for the $15 question? Because clearly, boom, everybody all at once, that's not reasonable, right? And so what is and this gets to the question that Sally was raising in a way, yeah, we're working on it, lacks a certain kind of sense of commitment, you know? And yet we have to have some sense as to what success along the way looks like, you know, such that we can engender trust that, yeah, in point of fact, we're on it, they're on it, you can trust this and so on. And so, you know, this is something about which I know, Greg, you feel passionate about. And so I'm wondering, I don't even know how to think about what the ramp up is in that, with that bucket of work, you know? Does that make sense?
Makes total sense. And Eric's a good person to sort of bring into the conversation at some point when you guys start talking about this in more depth, because he was part of that RAND work. But the idea was that the ramp up would begin in year 2. That year 1, there's no, in all of the financial modeling that RAND did, because it did several, as you remember, financial models. including one at $15 million, when it would kick in. And it kicks in the second year, and that's why the expectation is that
Where
August,
is it?
September. Yeah.
Right.
So, and I don't think that it's gonna take, years to sort of perfect, but I do believe there's an opportunity to, over the course of the next month or two, get Hector in a room with Eric and a handful of providers and get some sense as to what we can do,
Now,
appreciating the grant.
thank you.
Yeah, because all of those providers will be different.
Yeah.
And so we have to really consider that, and we have to be really careful of that cliff effect.
Yes,
And-
right,
and
right,
I'm
right.
really concerned about the differences and the issue that gets brought into, I mean, we already struggle with quality deserts, and are we going to be sure that, we're not creating another level of concern that might look like further disparities?
Right.
I think the communication is really important. I agree that we can't keep looking like we're studying something, but I think there's a balance in the action too. But it is time to get going.
Yeah.
The
There has to
It's got
be
to
some
get going.
movement.
It's got to be some movement.
The benefit of sitting down and doing some actual, hands-on work with actual budgets and Hector and Ellen and Eric is that, one, you get a better sense of what this should look like. Because it would work with an actual budget. But two, you'd have a group of providers who say, yeah, this works. This is a good start. There's some validation.
Totally understand. Alicia's changed her mind and is an observer now.
And I have a question, and I was actually contemplating this earlier. I was actually wondering, especially with other models like Denver and others that we have studied, I don't recall, within their quality improvement piece, did they have a
They
wage
did not.
aspect of that? No, okay, and then I also was curious about summer coverage. Do we know of any communities across the country who have also embarked on that piece as well?
Brittany has an answer to that
Or are we
question.
gonna be first in both, I guess is.
Dayton has definitely done that.
Piece for coverage, okay.
Denver has.
Denver did in various points along the way.
That was my further question. At what point did these communities go into summer coverage?
It's in Rand on the wages too. Both are in Rand. It's a fascinating document. We put a lot of time into it, but Seattle did, and they did it pretty quickly on wages, and Dayton did on summer. I mean, it's all, choices.
Right, right.
And also the funding is all.
Yeah, that's right.
Well,
it's
that's
all
it,
different.
yeah.
I mean, ours is through.
Well, the question is how how we optimize this, kind of the outcomes.
I would like to be involved in that too, because I have
Yeah.
strategies spinning in my head that need an outlet. So.
Sally, what a dangerous thing to say, that the board just receives with great joy.
I'm still, this issue of wage parity is really fascinating, and I totally appreciate your point about waiting for perfection to get started, and that would be, it's nothing I would ever advocate. But I continue to think about all the potential sort of knock-on effects of this kind of a process and unintended consequences, right? So have any of the studies shown, for example, if we have centers that are paying somebody $8, $9 an hour, we move to $15 an hour, that opens up a whole new pool of potential candidates. And so now we're also talking about the potential displacement of existing workers, right? And how is that modeled into some of the existing work that we're doing? So it's not as, I can't imagine that we're just gonna take everybody up from whatever to $15 and everything stays static. There's gonna be movement within these.
Yeah, money creates incentives, as we know.
I don't understand the displacement though.
It's your center, so this is why you get a bunch of providers in a room with Hector, and I think in a couple of days, they'll come out with some good recommendations. But if you're a center and you have a preschool, as she said, our preschool subsidizes our childcare, our toddler care. All of a sudden, you're paying your preschool teachers $15, $16 an hour. It's gonna be really hard to convince the childcare people to stay in those early.
Okay. I was thinking that you would tell people to get out because now
No.
you've got.
Sorry, I'm not articulating well. What I'm suggesting is that you've got now more money to spend on talent, and perhaps some of the people whom you have been employing up until now don't, now you can hire different talent, so that might cause some churn or some change.
That's
True.
Yeah.
I'd just like to go back to the thought I've offered, and that's getting the right group together.
Right.
All the things to
That
study.
Sally's gonna be on.
It's gonna be amazing. Harvard
That's
Business School.
something.
The-
You wanna do something.
you'll be part of that. The other thing, we look at data.
John isn't done yet.
We looked at data the last time, and, you know, I'm a data nut. And it just had huge spreads in hourly rates. Huge, all the way from $8 to $23. And I would inspect this, understand what it was in the places that were able to spend 15 and 8, what was it was enabling them to do that? So, I mean, I think there's a lot to be learned just from the data, in addition to strategies, as to how we're gonna do this. But again, this isn't something to wait for. I mean, we want to organize that group immediately, get the people at the table to figure out how they want to approach it.
I think Shiloh has been taking copious notes during the course of the meeting, and
I always
about half of our conversation, it seems, has been around this issue, and good for us to have that kind of weight on it. So I'm very excited about seeing where things will go on this moving forward and everything else besides. This seems to bring us to the end of the meeting, unless anybody has any other business to bring. That's always a dangerous question to ask.
I'd just like to comment positively on the metrics of getting to 900 and the 200 new seats that you're looking at from quality improvement. I think that would be a very big deal.
With those last remarks, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
So that was Laura and Debbie. Thank you. All those in favor indicate by getting up and walking towards the door. We'll see you. Good work, all.